up this section. So I have to keep the videos under 15 minutes long, otherwise I can't put them on YouTube. So that's why I have to keep stopping. So far we've simplified radicals, we've added and subtracted them. Now, to multiply them, it's a little bit easier because they can be different, just like when you multiply fractions. So use the product rule for radicals. So all you do is say, okay, 3 times radical 27, you would just multiply the number and then you simplify the radical if you can. So here we would have gotten, on the first one, radical 81, which simplifies to 9. On the second one, you got radical 39, which doesn't simplify because there's no perfect square that is a factor of 39, so you leave it. On the third one, 6 times 10 is 60. 4 goes into that, so that's a perfect square, so you simplify it. So you simplify it if you can, otherwise you just leave it. So you have to know whether a perfect square goes into it or not. So let me just do a couple more for you. So in other words, if I did radical 3 times radical 8, I would get radical 24, which simplifies to radical 4, radical 6. So final answer, 2 radical 6. If I do something like this, 2 radical 6 times 3 radical 7, I multiply the 2 and the 3, just like in the other one you added them. Now you multiply it, so I get 6 radical 42. So now if I'm going to simplify that, which I can't, I would just simplify into here and then multiply it by 6 at the end. So like, let's say for this one, I got radical 5 times 2 rad 10. So this would be like just 2 times 1, which is 2, and then radical 50. So now I'm going to simplify it, so that's going to be radical 25, radical 2, which is 5 radical 2, and then at the last minute you multiply those two, so that would be 10 radical 2. Okay, so that's multiplying. Dividing, if you have them divided, you could just separate them into 2 and divide the numbers. So if I have radical 75 divided by radical 3, I just put them together, divide 75 by 3, I get radical 25, which I simplify to radical 5. So to do another one of those, so if I had radical 60 over radical 5, that would be the same thing. Because they're both radicals, I can put them under together, get radical 12, because 60 divided by 5 is 12, simplified to radical 4, radical 3, which would be 2 radical 3. So if I did one more, if I had, even if it looks like this to begin with, 42 over 7, I would get radical 6. That's not simplifiable. I would just leave it. Okay, so you're just going to divide the numbers and simplify if you can when you're done. And then the last thing is what we call rationalizing. So rationalizing is a denominator is rationalized when it contains no radical. Okay, to rationalize the denominator, multiply both the numerator and the denominator by square root of the number. That will result in the radicand of the number becoming a perfect square. So when we rationalize, we don't want this radical 2 here. That's not considered rational. So we multiply it by radical 2 over radical 2, because again, remembering that just like when we got the same denominator in a fraction, this is equal to 1. So it doesn't matter that we're multiplying. But what happens is it gets rid of the radical in the denominator. So that's why we want to do it. Okay, so let me show you a couple more examples of that. So if I was going to rationalize, even if they both have radicals, like this, we only want to multiply by the bottom one. So we're always looking at this one. So we don't care that there's a radical on the top. That's okay. So we would multiply by radical 10 over radical 10, get radical 50 over 10, have to simplify the radical 50. So if I simplify radical 50, that's radical 25, radical 2. So that's 5 rad 2. Coming back up here, that's 5 rad 2 over 10. Then finally reducing the fraction like we did in the last section, that would be radical 2 over 5. So the goal is not to have a radical here in the denominator. So let me try another one here. show you how that's done. So if I did 5 over radical 12, okay, so I would multiply by radical 12 because I'm only worried about the denominator. So that would give me 5 radical 12 over 12. So radical 12 can become radical 4 and radical 3, or 2 rad 3. So now I have 5 times 2 rad 3 over 12. So that becomes 10 radical 3 over 12, and then I reduce it. So I divide them both by 2. I can't do anything to the radical 3, so my answer is 5 rad 3 over 6. The only thing that divides a radical is another radical. So last one, if I have radical 2 over radical 7, I would multiply by radical 7 over radical 7, and I would get radical 14 over 7. So you're always multiplying by whatever this bottom of the fraction is. And the last thing is just being able to, if it says approximating the square root, what you're getting in your calculator. So that's another reason I left my calculator here. So like if I put in radical 7 and they asked me to estimate what the answer was, oops, that didn't work. I hit the wrong thing. So second to radical 7, it's approximately, depending on what they want me to round to. If they said round to the nearest hundredth, it would be 0.265. Okay, so that's how you would get an approximation in your calculator. Again, I downloaded this calculator onto my computer. I also have it on my phone. So that's the best way to work with something, so that you make sure that you have this radical part. Okay, thank you. Bye.